are singing La Yehudim Haita Ora, that we should have light and joy and bring light into this new year, this new secular new year, 2021. Welcome. Please join us. La Yehudim Haita Ora, Haita Ora, Vesimcha Vesason, Ikar. La Yehudim Haita Ora, Haita Ora, Vesimcha Vesason, Ikar. Ken tiye lanu, tiye lanu, tiye lanu, tiye lanu, ken tiye lanu, tiye lanu, tiye lanu, tiye lanu. La Yehudim Haita Ora, Haita Ora, Vesimcha Vesason, Ikar. La Yehudim Haita Ora, Haita Ora, Vesimcha Vesason, Ikar. Ken tiye lanu, ken tiye lanu, tiye lanu, tiye lanu, ken tiye lanu, ken tiye lanu, tiye lanu, tiye lanu. La Yehudim Haita Ora, Haita Ora, Vesimcha Vesason, Ikar.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Boker Tov. Welcome to Central Synagogue's Mishkan service, our Shabbat Shacharit service. And we're delighted to see so many of you here with us in the Zoom room. And we know others of you are joining us virtually in other ways. So we're happy that you're all participating in a part of this community and a part of this service. Cantor Kedrain and I are really happy to be sharing in leading this service and participating in it with you. A number of you noticed it seems like we should be doing some Sondheim, which I think actually we're not. So I just want to put that disappointment out there in advance.
You never know, though. Maybe I'll spring something on you, Laura.
I'd love that.
Probably not, but you never know.
Okay, well, I'll be ready in case you do. We also, some of you have already noted it in the comment section that it's 2021, so I'm wearing my 2021 Shana Tova crown. We were planning on wearing these for 5781, but we decided that it didn't really feel like central. So, but here it is. So I'll take it off now. But we do, it's funny in Judaism. Our texts tell us that there are 4 New Years, 4 different dates that our people celebrated the New Year. And so when you add a secular 5th New Year to that, we have a lot of opportunities for saying, well, we're going to start fresh now. And I know that for many of us, we're hoping that 2021 will bring a little bit more light and joy and togetherness than this past year secularly has. And as we are eking towards March, and at least for New Yorkers, for us, that anniversary of staying at home and pausing and, really beginning some of this time apart in a more concrete way, we are hoping for, in the months ahead, hopefully increased opportunities for people to get vaccinated, continue to distance and mask as we need to, but hopefully start to do the work we need to get on the other side of this situation that we've been in for so long. So we wanted to focus this morning service on that hope and on that light and on that sense of a chance for renewal, because we also know we're going to need some renewed strength to get through the months ahead, that we're not quite at the end of this tunnel. People have talked about seeing some light, which I think is the right way to think of it. We have a lot of work to do for each other to try to continue to keep each other safe and healthy. So as we do that, we're going to begin our service on page 74. I should say continue our service. I could see Cantor Kadrain say in her head, we're continuing, Rabbi Lorge. We've already begun. So we're going to continue on page 74. Please join us. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. V'ani berov chastecha avo beitecha eshtachave el hechal kodshecha be'iratecha ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. V'ani tefilati lecha Adonai Yitzratzon Elohim Berov chastecha Haneni be'emet Yishecha Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. Tovu ohalecha Yaakov, ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael.
Rabbi Lorge, I've missed your guitar playing. It's so nice to hear it. This is one of the sad things about the Zoom mode is that we can't collaborate musically. It just doesn't work. They don't have the technology for that yet, but it's such a pleasure to hear you play, and I'm singing along over here, and I can see so many of you doing the same.
Definitely miss that. Definitely miss that.
One day. So we are continuing on page 78 with Elohai Neshama. This is one of the prayers that is designed to help us wake up. Rabbi Lorge and I were chatting before the service about comparing notes about just how early our babies woke up this morning. Rabbi Lorge definitely wins with a 5:40 a.m. wake up. We got a little more over here. We were about like 6:50, but still tired. And so this psalm kind of acknowledges that we're still waking up. And as we wake up, we give thanks to God for our ability to breathe. And so as we sing this psalm, I'll invite you to breathe deeply with your full body and full heart. Elohai neshama shenatata b'tehorani. Elohai neshama shenatata b'tehorani. Elohai neshama shenatata We continue on page 80 with Nisim B'chol Yom, this prayer that helps us to stop and recognize what big or small miracles are happening every day around us. And I'm turning now to the page.
I think it starts on page 80.
Page 80, thank you.
You're welcome.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has given thee and mine the ability to distinguish day from night.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who opens the eyes of the blind.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who frees the captive.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who lifts up the fallen.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who stretches the earth over the waters.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who strengthens our steps.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who clothes the naked.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who gives strength to the weary.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who removes sleep from the eyes, slumber from the eyelids.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who made me in the image of God.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me free.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me a Jew.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who girds Yisrael with strength.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who crowns Israel with with splendor. I'm feeling
And slumber. We are crowned with slumber.
That's the difference in the hour between you and me, I think.
That's so true. 5:40 to 6:50 is a big difference. We continue with Psalm 150. That's on page 100. And this is a psalm celebrating our ability to praise God with all different instruments and all different sounds, including our voices. And I know that in my house, I have the voice of my baby running around and chatting away. So if a week ago she would have been sleeping during this time, but she's not doing that anymore. She's awake at this hour. So I'm just inviting in those sounds and all the sounds in your home and all of your voices too, that we can sing out together with full hearts and full voices. And even though we can't hear each other, we can feel the presence of one another's voices singing, which is a blessing. במינים ועוגב, הללויה, הללויה, Having raised our voices together, we turn to the call to prayer, the Baruch Hu. That's page 108. And we rise in body or spirit. Baruch Hu et Adonai find our seats again. We turn to page 110 for Yotzer Or, this prayer that celebrates light as we welcome in the new light and the newness of 2021. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam yotzer or uvorei choshech oseh shalom uvorei et hakol. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam yotzer or uvorei choshech oseh shalom uvorei et hakol.
Let's read together at the top of page 111, and then we'll continue with the end of the Hebrew where we ask for that new light, for that Or Chadash. But let's set this intention together. In the beginning, even then, a new light was sown for the righteous, a promise that your light would become the catalyst, first for order and then for hope. Author of language and light, help us to use words as you have, to cast light into dark waters and draw out justice and truth.
Or Chadash al Zion Tahir, v'nizkechu lanu mehera leoro, Baruch atah Adonai we continue on page 110 with our song of freedom and redemption, with the hope and the prayer that this new secular year will bring more freedom and more hope for all of us and for everyone who needs it. Sur Yisrael, Kuma Bezrat Yisrael, Ufedechenu Mecha Yehuda veYisrael, Goaleinu Adonai Tzevot Shemo, Kedosh Yisrael, Baruch atah Adonai, Gad Yisrael. Page 124. We rise in body or spirit. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, v'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Konei Hakol, V'Zocher Chasdei Havot V'Imahot, U'Mevi Geula Livnei V'neihem, Leman Shemo Be'ahava, Melech Ozer U'Moshia U'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magid Avraham, Be'ezrat Sarah. Atah gibor le'olam Adonai, Mechaye hakol, Atah Rav le'hoshia, Mashiv haruach u'morid hagashem. Mechalkel chaim bechesed, Mechaye hakol berachamim rabim, Sohamech noflim v'rofech oholim, Umatir asurim, Umekayem emunato lishenei afar, Micha mocha bagivurot, Umidom elach, Melech mevit umechaye, Umatzmiach Yeshua, V'ne'eman atah lehachayot hakol, Baruch atah Adonai, Mechaye hakol. כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, ככתוב על יד נביאיך, וקדוש זה אל זה ואמר, קדוש קדוש קדוש, אדוני צבאות, מלוך הארץ,
We're going to continue now silently, either through the rest of the Amidah, which concludes on page 142, with our own prayers, or a little bit of both, and we'll come back together in song.
Olam Chesed Yibaneh. We will build this new year from Chesed, from compassion. Olam Chesed Yibaneh. Ya la la, ya la, ya la la, ya la. Olam Chesed Yibaneh. Ya la la, ya la, ya la la, ya la. Olam Chesed Yibaneh. Ya la la, ya la, ya la la, ya la. Olam Chesed Yibaneh. Ya la la, ya la, ya la la, ya la. I will build this world from love. Ya la la, ya la, ya la la, ya la. And you must build this world from love. Ya la la, ya la, ya la la, ya la. And if we build this world from love, ya la la, ya la, ya la la, ya la, then God will build this world from love. Ya la la, ya la, ya la la, ya la. Olam Chesed Yibaneh. Ya la la, ya la, ya la la, ya la. Olam Chesed Yibaneh. Ya la la, ya la, ya la la, ya la. Olam Chesed Yibaneh. Ya la la, ya la, ya la la, ya la. Olam Chesed Yibaneh. Ya la la, ya la, ya la la, ya la. As we turn now to the wisdom of our Torah, we have a Mishkan tradition of beginning this section with the words, "Hear, O Israel," which is so convenient because earlier in the service, I completely skipped over the Shema and forgot it. So thank you for the reminders. And we're going to come to it now. We'll sing, "Hear, O Israel," which is really an English interpretation of those same words of the Shema. And then we'll sing the Shema together, reminding us that we are one, we are united, we are echad, a single community from all of our homes. And then we'll continue on with some learning. Hear, O Israel, Adonai, our God is one. Hear, O Israel, Adonai, our God is one. Hear, O Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Avaed.
So we're going to continue with a chance to study a little bit together. I hope you've downloaded our text sheet for this morning. It can be found on our website, on our live stream section of the website where you can download it. It is excitingly entitled Deathbed Instructions, and we'll talk a little bit more about why. That'll be, I think, very clear as we go into the texts together. We're going to do something we don't usually do, which is pay attention to the Haftarah. So that's exciting. It is color-coded, Ed. Thanks for pointing that out. Not as much color coding as I'm used to doing with my text studies. It's a little light color coding for us to point out some of what's going on in terms of these internal dynamics. We don't usually talk much about the Haftarah. We tend to focus more on what's going on in the Torah itself. So let's. What do folks know about Haftarah? Why we read it? What are we reading? What is it meant to do? Anybody have any recollections about what this whole Haftarah business is all about? You should feel very confident putting out theories because the truth is we don't really know. Ed says it's meant to prolong the service, which is, I think, the way many of us do in fact experience this. I know it's the way I experienced this growing up. It's like that thing we have to endure before we get to Aleinu, right? And can finally say, oh, it's the concluding portion of the service. Thank goodness. Okay, so but go ahead. You feel free to unmute yourself and share if you've got some other stuff. Helen says, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think it was when we couldn't read the Torah, and it was to remind us of the portion without reading the portion.
So this is one of the theories that perhaps this tradition began during a period, maybe like the Hasmonean revolt, when Jews were forbidden to read Torah, and so they read these other sections of the Hebrew Bible from the section of our Hebrew Bible, the Nevi'im, the prophetic sections, that would remind us about the Torah portion. So they tend to have a little hint, and this is what Helen said, that they have this parallel narrative. There tends to be selections that are chosen that seem to hint or reference stuff that's going on in the Torah. So maybe we would read these and be like, oh yes, the Torah portion this week is about this, and this is the section. So it's like almost like secretive reading in order to get around the decrees against us. That's one theory. The Torah got lonely, Arden suggests, and needs some help. Some friends around could be. Another Torah study, we always went to the Haftarah when the Torah section was terribly boring. It's true that you might not, Paula, you might not necessarily find that you've struck gold in going to the Haftarah either. It is, as Susan says, from the prophets. So this is one of the few chances we get liturgically to read through some of these sections of our stories. And these prophetic stories can be beautiful or terrifying or terribly troubling or rather wonderful. It really runs the gamut. And the blessings before and after are beautiful, Ed says, and I think if I was going to choose Torah trope or Nusach or Haftarah, I would choose Haftarah every time. The way it is chanted, the melody is really beautiful and evocative.
I have to agree with you on that one.
Do you? Okay, I feel good about that. Cantor approval, that feels good. But another thought is that these may have been included eventually to be polemics against communities that didn't believe in the divinity of these books of the Bible. And this was a way to separate them from our community, because you wouldn't want to show up in a synagogue if they were reading this. Similar ways to some of the prayers that we have in the Amidah and elsewhere that were meant to exclude the early Christians as they were emerging, to make it clear that these were not communities for necessarily your viewpoints about Jesus and the Messiah, right? These were ways to kind of put lines in the sand between our community and your community. What we don't really know, what we do think is that this became relatively widespread by the year 100 CE, give or take. So after the fall of Jerusalem to the Romans. And, we get mentions and references to the Haftorah readings in the Talmud. So by then we have them as, relatively common practice. We think that they may not have necessarily been, today, by and large, the Jewish world is reading the same Haftarah for each community. So anywhere else in the world today, they're also reading from this section of Malachim Aleph, of First Kings. This may not have been the case. It may have been that they just kind of each community picked random passages to read. And maybe this is why in certain sections of Christian scriptures, Jesus goes into a synagogue and is just asked to read from the scroll of Isaiah anywhere and does so. Maybe this was an early Haftorah reading. But the truth is we just don't know. But it's now rather standard, and the stories have been chosen to parallel what's going on in the Torah. And so we're going to look at what those parallels are this week, because sometimes the similarities are clear, and sometimes there also are hidden, maybe more deliberate things going on in the text that require more than a quick glance. And I think this week's is one of those, that the immediate parallel is quite obvious, but there might be something going on that's a little bit deeper. So we're going to try to tease that out together. We're in, I suppose it's worth saying, the Torah portion is Vayechi. This is the final Torah portion in the book of Genesis, of Bereshit. So starting next week, we're moving to Shemot, we're moving to Exodus. So this week, after our study, I think Cantor Kedrain's going to lead us in the custom, yes, hands up in the air, I believe is yes, of singing Chazak, Chazak, Nid Chazek. So where are we? What's going on? Joseph, we're at the very end of this multi-week saga of Joseph's story. He is finally reunited with his family, so it seems. They've gotten themselves all to Egypt, and we have to tie up all of the loose ends. Vayechi means, and he lived. And despite that title, this is very much, the events will center around Jacob's death. Jacob, the father of Joseph and all of his brothers, and of Dinah, their sister. He's on his deathbed, and these are the events that surround it before we move forward in time in our new book of the Torah. So what I've done is put together, so the Haftarah that was chosen for this week is, like I said, from the book of First Kings, Malachim Aleph, and it's about the death of King David. And King David is giving instructions to his son Solomon. So based on that choice, I selected the sections from our Torah portion that have to do with what would be the parallel, the natural parallel, which is Jacob's death and his instructions to his son. And that, at first glance, seems to be the clear connection. In yellow, highlight, what you can see are a linguistic connection. In Hebrew, Vayikruvu Yemei Yisrael Lamut, in the section from Genesis. Vayakrivu, the time approached. Yemei Yisrael, the days of Israel approached for him to die. And that phrasing is very similar at the beginning of this chapter in 1 Kings. Vayikrivu, the same word. Yemei, same word. David instead of Yisrael. David instead of Israel. Lamut, same word, right? The days approached for David to die. So there already you have an almost word-for-word connection, except swapping the name of our main character. And what does David do before he dies? In green highlighter this time, Vayitzav. And Vayitzav. Vayitzav comes from the same root as mitzvah. And he commanded him. And in green we see again that same root happening in Genesis. Vayitzav and tziveh. These are tzivah, the things that that Jacob is commanding his sons to do. So there are linguistic connections that are asking us as close readers to say, hey, pay attention, similar things are happening here. This seems to be the thing you do when the days for your death are approaching. You command those around you to see to your final instructions, to see to your final wishes. So let's look at what the final wishes are. First of Jacob, or Israel as he's called, right? Because he has both names. And unlike Abraham, who goes from Avram to Avraham and remains Avraham his whole life, Jacob never quite seems to do that. He's Yaakov and Yisrael, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. But here we are Yisrael. Here we are by and large Israel. And so let's see what he instructs his children. I will ask for a volunteer, but if we don't get them quickly to move us along, I'll just choose from who's close to me or not. Phyllis, please, if you'd read this first section from Bereshit, from Genesis, and when the time approached. Then he instructed them.
Then he instructed them, saying to them, I am about to be gathered to my kin. Bury me with my fathers in the cave which is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, the cave which is in the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, in the land of Canaan, the field that Abraham bought from Ephron the Hittite for a burial site. There Abraham and his wife Sarah were buried. There Isaac and his wife Rebekah were buried. And there I buried Leah, the field and the cave in it, bought from the Hittites.
So our first instruction that we get, that Israel gives to his children is, please bury me, return me to the land of Canaan, or what will be the promised land, Israel, to the ancestral burial site of the rest of my family. So let's keep going. Elsewhere in these final chapters, we have more instructions in these deathbed scenes. Would somebody like to read the next text? All right, Ed, go for it.
Unmute.
I unmuted there. And when the time approached for Israel to die, he summoned his son Joseph and said to him, do me this favor, place your hand under my thigh as a pledge of your steadfast loyalty. Please do not bury me in Egypt. When I lie down with my fathers, take me up from Egypt and bury me in their burial place. He replied, I will do as you have spoken. And he said, swear to me. And he swore to him. Then Israel bowed at the head of the bed.
So again, a very similar instruction, just a little bit of a different audience. But a few chapters earlier, we get this instruction again. This is very important to Jacob or Israel. All right, let's read our last set of requests or commands, depending on how you want to interpret them. One more reader, please. Go ahead. Thank you, Paula. And I see that I also have to scroll my screen to see everyone. So I apologize if I'm ignoring your hand. I will rectify that in the coming texts.
So they sent this message to Joseph. Before his death, your father left this instruction. So shall you say to Joseph, forgive, I urge you, the offense and guilt of your brothers who treated you so harshly. Therefore, please forgive the offense of the servants of the God of your father. And Joseph was in tears as they spoke to him. His brothers went to him themselves, flung themselves before him and said, we are prepared to be your slaves. But Joseph said to them, have no fear. Am I a substitute for God? Besides, although you intended me harm, God intended it for good, so as to bring about the present result, the survival of many people. And so, fear not, I will sustain you and your children. Thus he reassured them, speaking kindly to them.
Now, there's a lot we could do with this passage. This happens after Jacob's death, and all of the rest of the brothers grow a little bit fearful of Joseph and worry that his father's now dead, and maybe his father was the one thing keeping Joseph from exacting retribution finally on his brothers who treated him so harshly. And so they send this message to Joseph saying, before our father died, he also tziveh, he also commanded this other thing on his deathbed, which was that you should really forgive us and mean it this time. And we don't see this happen. This is not one of the things that is recorded in the Torah. So did this happen, or is this an invention of the brothers trying to appease Joseph? We don't know. You can find arguments on either side of the road on that. But let's, for the sake of this argument, say that it doesn't particularly matter because Joseph, the outcome is the same. Joseph says, essentially, I bear you no grudge, and I am not going to in any way harm you, seek retribution, or my forgiveness was true and complete, and you need not worry. There's a lot of other interesting things happening in this passage, foreshadowing slavery and things like that. We'll leave all of that aside. We could spend a lot of time in this passage, but we're not going to. What matters here is that whether Jacob commanded it or not, Joseph makes clear his forgiveness is complete, and nothing, his father need not have died worrying about that, if that's really the case. So this series of instructions is then contrasted with, or at least put up against, right? Because we're meant to read these side by side. This was chosen deliberately. So this is meant to be read side by side with this section from 1 Kings. Show of hands, how familiar are folks with the David Solomon stories? Decently familiar, you can raise your hand. Not quite as familiar, you can go middle ground. And never read them at all, you can just leave your hand down. Just so I get a sense of how much middle. Okay, so just a little bit of context to help. This is during the period we like to call the United Monarchy. And in this period, we get the tradition is this is the best of times, because we're always in our stuff talking about the return to the Davidic dynasty and the United Monarchy when all was well and good. So this is, we've conquered the land of Israel. We've gone through the period of judges. The people of Israel wickedly decide that they don't want to just be ruled by God. They also want to be ruled by kings like the other nations around them. One of the prophets says, I don't think this is a good idea, and asks God about it. And God says, this isn't a good idea. We shouldn't have kings, but look, if they really want it, so be it. It's on them now. And they appoint the first king, who is King Saul. And King Saul, leads a lot of wars against the enemies of Israel, because one of the problems was we had all these enemies attacking us, and there was no centralized army or leaders that could, fight back. And so one of the things that King Saul does is, he's able to do that. Long story short, he loses the favor of God and is replaced by somebody who's not part of his dynasty, King David. King David. Great guy, except when you read the stories about him. The tradition loves King David, but a lot of what we read about him in the Bible, there's some good and some bad, just like most of our biblical characters. And he rules. He helps bring the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, begins the building of God's temple in Jerusalem, and fights a lot of wars. Most of us are probably familiar with his story about David and Bathsheba, at least a little bit from other allusions in Western literature or songs like, anyway, it doesn't matter, but this cycle where he steals someone else's a wife who he falls in love with on a rooftop, and puts the actual husband on the front lines of war so that he can die and he can take his wife. He does a lot of other things too, but that's probably one of the most famous sections of his story. But here we are at the end of his life. The other huge event in his life is one of his sons, his firstborn at the time, Absalom. Supposedly wrote the Psalms. He was a musician and a poet. But his oldest son at the time, Absalom, leads a rebellion against King David, against his father. And they have a war, one against the other, father against son, army against army. So there are these grudges from that war. there are these grudges. He also fought against King Saul. King Saul was seeking him and trying to kill him. And so you have all of these old grudges. And there's also a major division in the land between the northerners, who King Saul was from, and the southerners, where King David's people are from. And this north-south divide will be so big that after the death of David's son, King Solomon, who's getting his instructions here, the nation will actually split apart into a northern kingdom that's confusingly called Israel, and a southern kingdom that's called Judah. And those two nations end up fighting against each other quite a bit. So that ends the united monarchy. The end of King Solomon's reign ends the united monarchy, and we descend into a lot of division and discord. Now, Solomon is known to be, not necessarily a warrior, but a man of peace, right? Shlomo, his name in Hebrew, it comes from the same root as shalom, as does Yerushalayim. Jerusalem also has that root in it. And Solomon is a wise king who really is known for his knowledge, his brains, and his peacemaking. So here is David's final words to Solomon. And let's decide what's going on? How similar or different is this to what we've heard from Jacob? Now, Helen, did you have your hand up earlier to read? Would you mind reading the last words of King David?
Okay. When David's life was drawing to a close, he instructed his son Solomon as follows. I am going the way of all the earth. Be strong and show yourself a man. Keep the charge of Adonai, your God, walking in God's ways and following God's laws, commandments, rules, and admonitions as recorded in the teachings of Moses, in order that you may succeed in whatever you undertake and wherever you turn. Then Adonai will fulfill the promise made concerning me. If your descendants are scrupulous in their conduct and walk before me faithfully and with their heart and soul, your line on the throne of Israel shall never end. Do you want to continue?
Why don't we take a break there? Right. So this first set of requests, instructions, commands is follow the law of God, be true to it, because then our dynasty will reign forever, and show yourself to be a man. I'm guessing those two men, based on their descriptions, probably had very different sensibilities of what that might mean, and we could have a very interesting conversation about the construct of masculinity, but we're not going to do that either. We're going to keep going and read what else King David instructs Solomon. Do we have another volunteer? Otherwise, Eric, please, would you pick up with further you know what Joab?
Further you know what Joab, son of Jerusalem, did to me, what he did to the two commanders of Israel's forces, Abner, son of Ner, and Amasa, son of Jether. He killed them, shredding blood of war in peacetime, staining the girdle of his loin and his sandals on his feet with blood of war. Keep going?
Please, one more sentence.
So act in accordance with your wisdom and see to that his white hair does not go down the shoulder in peace. Excuse me?
Yes, Eric.
As an overview, it sounds like David is writing his trust and will, a revocable trust.
Well, I think these are his last wishes.
And the last wishes, and as a solo ager, I don't have immediate family, but I had to go. It was a very tedious and soul searching. Who's going to be my trustee? I just wanted some, and also it saves me some money. I don't have to pay a lawyer, but it was like me writing my final wish. I don't want this to happen to me. I want somebody to bury me, so if I get sick or injured, the cops know what to do.
Right. Well, Eric, it sounds like you were a little bit more like Jacob and less like King David, which is good. Well, we're going to read more about what King David asks, but this next request that you just read, as you saw, was a request for Solomon to kill someone. So Solomon is instructed here by David that he should kill Joab. Now, who is this character, Joab? that Solomon's supposed to kill. He was David's most trusted general for a time. He was one of his co-conspirators in the attempts to get Uriah the Hittite away from his wife Bathsheba. And he was really David's right hand, especially in the war against Saul. So what did he do? Saul's generals killed Joab's brother in battle. And then when David makes peace with them, in this period of peace, Joab kills those two generals who had killed his brother. It's a little bit Game of Thronesy here, right? This is right under the banner of peace. They're all together, and what do? This general kills two of their old enemies because of the deaths that had happened in war. And so David says to his son, I couldn't kill Joab. He was my best friend, my best general, but I was never able to kill him. It's time that we do that, though. He's shown himself to be somebody who will not follow our instructions. Joab also, in the battle against Absalom, was one of the people who helped kill Absalom at the end. So David may also be a little bit upset about that. Because I think even though Absalom had rebelled, it was clear David really didn't want his son to be killed in this battle. So what does Solomon do? Solomon sends an assassin to one of the temples where Joab has fled, thinking that they surely won't kill me if I'm standing in the temple holding the altar. But they go ahead and they kill him right there after they drag him out. All right, so let's read what else the good King David is asking his son Solomon to do. Deal graciously. Would somebody be willing to read there? It's a short one. Go ahead, Monica.
But deal graciously with the sons of Barzillai the Gileadite, for they befriended me when I fled from your brother Absalom. Let them be among those that eat at your table.
The sons of Barzillai were really great to me during this rough period, so you should be good to them. And that's exactly what Solomon does. And Monica, would you finish us out here?
You must also deal with Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjaminite from Bahurim. He insulted me outrageously when I was on my way to Mahanaim.
That's it.
But he came down to meet me at the Jordan, and I swore to him by Adonai, I will not put you to the sword. So do not let him go unpunished, for you are a wise man, and you will know how to deal with him and send his gray hair down to Shaul in blood. So David slept with his fathers, and he was buried in the city of David. The length of David's reign over Israel was 40 years. He reigned 7 years in Hebron, and he reigned 33 years in Jerusalem. And Solomon sat upon the throne of his father David, and his rule was firmly established.
Thus ends our Haftorah reading for this week. So David's final request to Solomon is again a request for him to commit an act of murder, this time against Shimei, the son of Gera, who when the revolt was happening with Absalom, David was forced to flee. And while he was fleeing with his men, this man, Shimei, comes out and starts cursing him. Now, Shimei is a Benjaminite, so he's from the same clan that King Saul was from. And he's one of these people who has long been harboring this grudge about the way that King Saul was treated. And so he goes out, and as David is fleeing from his home, he's just yelling curses at King David. And then when David is victorious, he comes back to ask for forgiveness from King David. And I want to read that section because I think there might be a clue, right? We could just stop here and say, well, this was the Haftorah that was chosen for this Torah portion because they're both about deathbed instructions. But as you put them side by side, are they similar? No, I mean, not really. They both are talking about whether they want to be buried, I suppose. But I wonder, do you think the tradition is telling us we should be like King David in the way that we think about the ends of things? Not so much. I would say King David doesn't seem to be a great model to us. this reads and ends up looking, right? The subsequent verses are Solomon carrying out his wishes. And it reads much like the end of The Godfather, right? This scene by scene of settling the scores of, where Michael Corleone is settling the scores of his father. That's pretty much what happens. And it sets up Solomon well to rule because he's gotten rid of enemies and he's supporting the people who ended up supporting David. He rules over a period of peace. But I don't think this Haftorah reading is here to say this is a great example to follow. Right? Whereas at the very end of the Torah portion, what we read, whether we believe the brothers or not, is this message of reconciliation. And this is rather anything but. This is taking your grudges beyond your death even. So let's see if we can tease out a little bit more meaning here. Doron?
Yeah. Well, I think, I think both selections, have, we can say, a larger theme and a more personal theme. I think even with David, with all the blood and revenge that we see here, at the beginning, what we're told is that he tells Solomon, follow the laws of Moshe, follow the laws of God, and that will allow you to continue exercising your powers and your dynasty. Now, if it had stopped at that point, we would probably say that David is almost a great prophetic figure, and there's nothing. And then comes the bad stuff that we just talked about. So, you can say they're inconsistent, but they're also realistic because at that time, that form of revenge and of getting rid of your enemies was probably the only way to continue survival. So you had to do both. If we shift over to Jacob and Joseph, the two sections that you took, they seem to say the same thing, but I see a little bit of a difference in them. In one of them, he gives the instruction and he says, do not bury me in Egypt. I do not want to die in Egypt. He doesn't specify, or he doesn't spend as much time talking about where he does want to be. But I think the notion that Jacob's connection to Canaan, or what later became Israel, is what is emphasized there. It's almost as if wherever I'm buried, please I don't want to die here, which is where fate has taken me in this part of my life. Later, we get the specificity of the family continuity and in Hebron, etc. So I think both of them have what we could call a larger theme, one of connection with the people and continuity, and one that connects, in the case of Jacob, with family continuity, and in the case of David, also with family continuity, but in a more savage way.
I think that's right. That's nice. I want to point us to a few texts that I think show the rabbis looking to do similar things, which is close some of these loops here. Let's, for our own sake, read the section where this man, Shimei, son of Gera, comes to make reconciliation with King David, right? So this is years earlier, before this deathbed scene. King David has had success in his war, and he's coming back. This man, Shimei, had cursed him on his way out, and now as he returns, Shimei comes to ask for forgiveness. Would somebody read 2 Samuel 19, 17 through 21? Doron, would you be willing, since you...
No, I just don't happen to have it on my screen. I'm on a smaller screen.
No worries. Would somebody else who has it... Thanks, Alyssa.
Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjaminite from Bahurim, hurried down with the Judites to meet King David, accompanied by 1,000 Benjaminites.
So just really quickly, Shimei's there, right? One of the Benjaminites, somebody from the tribe of Benjamin, and he's also brought with him 1,000 other Benjaminites. So his clan is there. Yeah.
And Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, together with his 15 sons and 20 slaves, rushed down to the Jordan ahead of the king while the crossing was being made, to escort the king's family over and to do whatever he wished. Shimei, son of Gera, flung himself before the king as he was about to cross the Jordan. He said to the king, "Let not my lord hold me guilty, and do not remember the wrong your servant committed on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. Let your majesty give it no thought, for your servant knows that he has sinned. So here I have come down today, the first of all the house of Joseph, to meet my lord the king.
Anyone see something there they want to pick up on? What ends up happening is, as he was leaving, one of King David's servants said, "Hey, this guy Shimei is cursing you. It's not right for him to be cursing the king. Shall I go kill him?" And King David says no. And here, as they're coming back, Shimei says that, and then the same servant of King David says, "Shall I kill him?" This guy seems really intent. And King David once again says, "No. As long as I live, we will never harm Shimei," basically. But anyone see anything interesting in the text?
Well, David's coming back alive. So he might have died in this war, but he comes back alive. So I would think Shimei's a little nervous, but because his curse didn't work. But on the other hand, he comes with an awful lot of people. It sounds like a little bit of an army himself.
Yes, though they don't seem, it's certainly a lot of people, but they don't seem intent on war. And my guess is they didn't look warlike. They probably, are there to show support, right? This is a return, a victorious return. And you're right, he should be very nervous to be showing his face. And he's there with a lot of the other representatives of the former King Saul. Again, this wasn't a war between, Saul's long dead at this point. They are just people who hold ancient grudges, or at least old grudges. Shimei is described as being from what tribe? Benjamin. He's a Benjaminite. How does he describe himself, though?
House of Joseph.
The house of Joseph. He's not really from the house of Joseph. We know that he's not from the house of Joseph. Many, many times the Bible goes out of its way to call him a Benjaminite. So, house of Joseph, Joseph didn't really have a particular tribe. He has two tribes that are named after his son, and those collectively are his sons, and those collectively come to be thought of as the house of Joseph. So why is Shimei calling himself a representative, right, the first of all the house of Joseph? I'm a leader in the house of Joseph, when we know he's not from either of those two tribes. Well, it could be that he's just, right, the original intent of the Bible here may simply be that this was the way of Shimei saying, I'm a representative of all the northern tribes, those tribes who were most loyal to King Saul, and here we are to make an absolute peace with you. But our Midrash makes, I think, more of that, though not explicitly. You kind of have to be paying attention to what's going on in between the lines. There's this Midrash from Tehillim, and they reimagine the scene like this, I think picking up on that unusual description. And they imagine this dialogue having taken place between Shimei and King David. Alyssa, would you read once more?
When Shimei came before David, he said to him, "The brothers of Joseph did him injury, but Joseph returned good for evil. Be thou as Joseph, and recompense me with good, though I dealt evilly with thee. It was not I alone, but all Israel that entreated thee ill. They now await my fate, and if thou forgivest me, they will come and make peace with thee and surrender themselves to thee."
And so here the Midrash is saying, by using the phrase house of Joseph, what Shimei may be saying is, treat me as Joseph treated his brothers. Treat me in that same way. I've come before you. I know I did wrong. I'm here to seek forgiveness. Please actually forgive me the way that Joseph actually and truly forgave his brothers. So that when Israel died, Joseph didn't take his revenge. Be like that. Mm-hmm. And if that's the way that our tradition is reading this text and putting these two scenes next to each other, we know that in some ways David is not at all like that, right? David does the opposite. David chooses to forgive in the moment, but not forgive forever. And when the time comes that he, can be absolved of the forgiveness he gave in that moment through death, he'll have his son do what he's not able to do himself. And an almost, antithesis to what happens between Joseph and his brothers. They did him terrible wrong, and he's able to forgive in a way that is lasting through the generations and beyond. So I think these stories are put next to each other for more than just a similarity in type scene. It's not just that they're both deathbed instructions. I think our rabbis are reading in between the lines here. So I think these stories are... I think somebody's... okay, that's better. Thank you for muting. I think these stories are meant to say more than that. They're put side by side here, Torah and Haftarah, to ask us to think about this question of reconciliation, of forgiveness, and of the way grudges can live beyond even individual lives and exist through the generations. Because if we then actually do think about the fact that this is a story about King David and this guy, Shimei the Benjaminite, and what we see are actually there are tribes here that are still warring, tribes that are the sons of Israel who are continuing to hold grudges and a sense of favoritism and war. So in some ways, maybe this is also saying that those sibling dynamics that we've been reading about through Genesis, although they seem to come to an end in Exodus, actually remain very resonant and alive for these people, even into the book of First Kings and beyond. And so maybe we're asked to find ways to put some of these grudges behind us if we can, because we see what the impacts can be generations long, not just within our single lives. A lot more that could be said, and I think if nothing else, we leave realizing that Francis Ford Coppola may have a strong sense of biblical type scenes as he puts his work together. And certainly Game of Thrones does too. But I think these questions of reconciliation, forgiveness, grudge bearing, and are so alive and resonant in these final chapters and beyond. And if you find yourself in shul thinking about the unendurable Haftarah, maybe give it a second look a little closer. There's some real richness here. And the way these texts play and interplay can be really... challenging for us and another layer of our tradition and our teaching. So I hope this is a window into another venture. So I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom as we, for those of you who have been waiting very, very patiently, we'll turn to our closing prayers.
So as Rabbi Lorge mentioned, this is the end of a book of the Torah today, this week. And we have this tradition of saying chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek when we finish a book, which is be strong, and may we strengthen one another. So I want to invite us to join in that together with the hope that we can find forgiveness, as Rabbi Lorge taught us about and helped us to understand, that we can find forgiveness and compassion for ourselves and one another as we step into this new year. I want to also give a little shout out to our friend Laura Strauss, whose birthday is tomorrow. And Laura, you give us strength. And so we wish for you that you find that same strength in the coming year. And for anyone else who's watching or who's with us, who has a birthday this week, this is for you also. And we join in these words, chazak, together. Chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek.
Chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek.
We turn now to our prayer for healing. We send healing and chazak and strength to anyone who needs it. So if you have the name of someone in mind who's in need of healing this morning, we invite you to share it in the chat, share it in the Facebook comments, say it aloud in the room, or simply quietly in your heart wherever you are. And we pray for healing for all of them and for all of us. bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, we turn to the first of our concluding prayers, V'hashevota. V'hashevota elem avecha hi Adonai hu Elohim v'nemar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad.
Our service always closes with an opportunity for memory and memorial. We recall with affection these dear ones who died in the last 4 weeks, for whom we're in a period of Shloshim. Jerome Bernheim, father of Doug, Claudia, and Tricia. Alan Richard Epstein, father of Peggy and Elizabeth. Lisa Hockman, mother of Jason, Nicole, and Jared. Claire Levin, mother of Susan Hoffman. Helga Loeb, mother of Diane, Roger, and Janet. Henry Marks, father of Alan and Stephen. Ivan Udis, father of Andrew. We recall also those whose yahrzeits occur on this Shabbat. I would invite you to share the names of those whom you're in a period of mourning, or if you're remembering them, you can share their name in the chat so that we can recite for them Kaddish Yatom, Mourner's Kaddish, which can be found on page 294, as we join together in these words. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, ve'alma divrach hirteh ve'amlich malchuteh, b'chayechon v'yomechon uv'chayeh dechol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala v'zman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevarach le'olam olamei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yithaleh v'yithalal shmei dekudesha berichu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, ta'amiran be'alma v'yimru Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen.
Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Is there a baby over there? Yeah. There's a baby who's going to join us for the closing song. Hi, baby. We have a song for you, which is, it's a little tricky with the guitar. Go ahead, you do it. You know what? Rabbi Lord is going to start the song. So this is a song, a blessing for all of us going into 2021, that we will have a year of goodness and of wholeness. And you can find the words on your order of service, and we invite you to join us.
Otire, kama tov yiheh. We'll see just how good it'll be. תראה כמה טוב יהיה בשנה הבאה. תראה כמה טוב יהיה בשנה הבאה. בשנה הבאה נשב על המרפסת ונספור סיפורים נודדות. ילדים בחופשה יסתכלו תופסת בין הבית לבין השדות. תראה כמה טוב יהיה בשנה הבאה. תראה כמה טוב יהיה בשנה הבאה.
בשנה הבאה נפרוס כפות ידיים מול האור הניגר הלבן. ענף הלבנה נפרוס כאור כנפיים והשמש תזרח התוכן. תראה כמה טוב יהיה בשנה הבאה. תראה כמה טוב יהיה בשנה הבאה.
תראה כמה טוב יהיה בשנה הבאה. תראה כמה טוב יהיה בשנה הבאה.
בשנה הבאה. Shabbat Shalom and Happy New Year, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.